Mino Carta, one of the most emblematic names in Brazilian journalism. A man whose life and career became inseparable from the evolution of the national press. Died this Tuesday, too, in São Paulo. He was 91 years old, a veteran who had lived long, enough to not only witness but actively shape the history of journalism in Brazil, constantly reinventing the way information was presented and courageously facing both political powers and the inevitable transformations of the media landscape. According to the magazine he founded, Carta Capital, which broke the news of his passing. The journalist had been struggling with health problems for some time, moving in and out of hospitals during his final months. His last days were spent at the Sírio-Libanês Hospital, one of São Paulo's most renowned institutions, where he had been hospitalized for the past 2 weeks in the intensive care unit. It was there, surrounded by his family and under the care of doctors, that he drew his final breath early in the morning. His death was confirmed at 5:59 a.m. Stuskeli, and the news immediately reverberated through the press, through political circles, and among readers who grew up with his words and publications. The wake began at noon this Tuesday at the São Paulo Cemetery in Pinheiros. It's located in the west zone of the capital, and the journalist's body was buried early in the evening. The ceremony drew prominent figures, but perhaps the most symbolic presence was that of President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who traveled directly from Brasília to São Paulo to attend the farewell of the man who, for decades, chronicled and critiqued Brazil with sharp words, intellectual courage, and unwavering independence. Born in Genoa, Italy, in 1933, Mino Carta arrived in Brazil at the age of 16. In 1949, immigrating with his family in the post-war years, seeking new beginnings in a country that, though distant, represented opportunity. The experience of displacement would deeply mark his identity, leaving him with the dual consciousness of someone who belonged to both Europe and Latin America, but also to neither fully. This perspective gave him an unusual critical distance when it came to observing Brazil, its contradictions, and its fragile democracy. He was educated in São Paulo, where he developed a taste for literature and an uncompromising intellectual curiosity, and soon after began working in the press, finding his true calling in the world of newsrooms, headlines, and stories that demanded telling. Mino Carta's career was nothing short of groundbreaking. In 1960, he launched Quatro Rodas, a magazine dedicated to the automotive world, but which soon transcended its original niche through innovative design, reader-friendly content, and sharp editorial standards. It was in Quatro Rodas that Carta began developing his trademark style, clarity mixed with sophistication, and an editorial rigor that was uncompromising when it came to facts. In 1966, he was instrumental in the creation of Jornal da Tarde, a newspaper that was considered revolutionary for its language and layout. While most Brazilian newspapers at the time clung to rigid structures, Jornal da Tarde dared to break conventions. Using accessible writing and bold visuals, it was in many ways a newspaper ahead of its time, one that anticipated modern journalistic practices, and its DNA carried Carta's imprint. But perhaps the most defining chapter of his career came in 1968, when he helped launch Veja, a magazine that would become one of Brazil's most influential weekly publications. Under Carta's direction, Veja quickly distinguished itself for its investigative work and its readiness to challenge the military dictatorship that ruled Brazil with iron fists. In those years, Mino Carta became both admired and feared a journalist whose pen could unsettle the powerful. It was Veja, under his stewardship, that dared to publish reports exposing torture and human rights violations committed by the military regime. The result was predictable: censorship, pressure, threats, and relentless attempts to silence the magazine. Yet, far from retreating, Carta seemed to draw strength from adversity. His resistance to dictatorship became part of his legend, reinforcing his image as someone who believed that journalism was not simply about reporting facts, but about holding power accountable, no matter the personal or institutional cost. In 1976, Carta was behind the creation of Isto, another weekly magazine that would become a reference point in Brazilian journalism. His fingerprints were again evident: critical analysis, strong investigative work, and the courage to tackle themes others avoided, even when ventures failed, as was the case with Jornal da República in Ijo Tijo A project born in the climate of political liberalization, but one that could not survive financially. His failures carried symbolic weight. Jornal da República, though short-lived, became a landmark for the press, remembered not for its commercial viability, but for the intellectual audacity it represented. For Mino, failure was never the end. It was a lesson, a marker along the road of experimentation and resistance. He once reflected on that experience with a mixture of irony and dignity, recognizing that journalism, like democracy, is built not just on triumphs, but also on attempts, on the willingness to try even in hostile environments. The 1990s marked what Mino Carta himself considered his greatest achievement: the foundation of Carta Capital in 1994. More than just another magazine, Carta Capital was his intellectual and moral statement, his definitive attempt to build a publication that adhered strictly to three principles: fidelity to the facts, critical thinking, and oversight of power. While other magazines often catered to commercial pressures or political interests, Carta Capital was built to resist both, positioning itself as an alternative voice in Brazilian media. Its editorial line was unabashedly critical of neoliberal economic policies, corruption in politics, and the growing trivialization of news in mainstream outlets. For Carta, journalism had to be serious, investigative, and committed to the public good, not entertainment or spectacle. It was not an easy path. The magazine faced financial difficulties, market competition, and the challenges of an evolving media ecosystem. Yet it survived and reached its 31st anniversary in 2025. A living testament to the durability of the ideas that guided its founder. Beyond his professional work in journalism, Mino Carta was also a man of letters. He devoted himself to literature in later years, producing novels that combined autobiographical elements with philosophical reflection. Works such as Amber Castle 2000, The Shadow of Silence 2003, and The Life of Matt 2016 showcased his intellectual restlessness and his capacity to blend memory with imagination. These books revealed aspects of his personality less visible in his journalistic endeavors: his melancholy, his reflections on silence and time, his sense of exile and belonging. In them, one could trace the journey of an Italian boy who became a Brazilian intellectual, but who never ceased questioning the world, his country, and himself. His literary voice was just as sharp and thoughtful as his editorial one, though imbued with more introspection. In his later years, however, Mino became increasingly disenchanted with Brazilian politics and with the trajectory of journalism in the digital age. He criticized the overwhelming impact of technology, lamenting what he described as the enslavement of the press by new media. For him, the rise of algorithms, social networks, and clickbait was not a sign of progress, but of decline. He worried that journalism had lost its gravitas, its sense of duty, and had surrendered to immediacy and superficiality. In interviews, he often expressed bitterness about this transformation, warning that a democracy without serious journalism is condemned to fragility. His critiques resonated with those who, like him, feared that truth and depth were being replaced by speed and noise.